I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, home of the modern whitetail hunter. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Hey everyone, welcome to Wired to Hunt. I'm your guest host, Tony Peterson, and today I'm talking with Tim Kent how to become a more efficient and effective deer hunter. Welcome to Wired to Hunt, which is brought to you by First Light. I'm your guest host, Tony Peterson. You'll notice that Mark Kenyon is off again, out on another vacation. I think he said he was at the National Hopscotch Convention down in Tyler, Texas. So feel free to wish him luck down there in that competition. My guest today is Tim Kent. Tim, he sells real estate for Whitetail Properties. He owns a marketing company in the outdoor space. He is a diehard bow hunter. Rifle hunter too, I should say, but mostly a bow hunter out in New York State. He makes a trek out west at least once a year to hunt elk. The guy is ate up with hunting, and he's at a point in his life where he's really figured out how to manage this balance between family and hunting and being super disciplined and kind of freelancing it out in the woods. He's got a really neat perspective on whitetail hunting and hunting in general and how you can enjoy it more while also doing a bunch of stuff in the outdoors that helps you level up your woodsmanship. Tim is a great inspiration, and he really has some nice real world whitetail hunting advice. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Tim Kent, how are you doing, buddy?
I am great, Tony. The sun is out. It's like 70 something degrees, low humidity. We can't ask for better weather in New York State. So that always keeps my mood real high.
Yeah. After the heat spell that we just got through earlier in the summer, it's like dreamy weather.
Yeah. You guys really had it, man. It sounded like it was like jungle hot out there.
It was stupid. I mean, it was just, it was the kind of weather where you're like, I don't want to run. I don't want to go scout. I don't want to really do a whole lot outside except be in the water. And it moved on finally, but it stuck around a long time, and it was rough, man. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't do well in those types of conditions. I don't mind the heat, but when the humidity kicks up, I just don't feel great. I feel woozy in my head, and I could never live down south. I applaud the people that do live down there. It's not for me. You know, take me out west where it's dry. It's plenty humid, like in the lake region where we are, and I'm good. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm sure there are southern bow hunters down in Florida or Louisiana or somewhere that listen to this. They're like, these guys are such pansies.
Totally. I'll put that badge on my shirt. No problem, right? I'm sure it's got a very special emblem and everything else. Yep. They can call me whatever they want.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to have you on because, you know, you're a good friend of mine, and we talk whitetail hunting a lot, but you and I are kind of both in the same life space. We're relatively the same age, and we've gone through a lot of the trophy hunting stuff, and we're in sort of a different stage of deer hunting. And I love your perspective on it because you're one of those people out there you're really getting after staying in shape. and you really get after the whitetails, but you have this like targeted approach and this disciplined approach. And I think it just ties in so well. And the message with the kind of the way you structure your life is really relevant to everybody who loves whitetails. Because I think we see this message out there a lot. And this is so prevalent on social media, right? Where you think that people who are in the industry or who are really successful whitetail hunters are scouting every day of the year and they're out running cameras and they're out doing something. And it's not. You and I both know it's not true. Like, people are taking days off. They're taking weeks off. You know, when you have that 3-week time period where it's 100 degrees every day with 100% humidity, you know, not everybody's out there, you know, scouting early June deer. And I think your approach to that is just awesome.
Well, and there are guys that are after it every day because they feel like they have to be. I guess for me, I sort of graduated beyond that thought process for me. You know, we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, and you know, I thought to myself, life is really short and it's about having fun, right? It's one of the reasons why I've been self-employed the vast majority of my career, because working for somebody else, in my mind, isn't all that much fun. I don't have the freedoms that I want and whatever else. So when it comes to the whitetail side of things and transitioning to it, it can be a lot of work. And I needed to augment that and find other ways to, although whitetail hunting is a lot of fun, right? And preparing for it and everything else, I needed to find other ways to offset it, because I found my degrees of satisfaction, like if we were looking at it from an economic standpoint, were decreasing with time because I was feeling a lot of pressure. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself, just that intra-industry thing. Like when you get involved in the industry, you're like, oh my gosh, I have to perform and do all these things and be out in the field all the time and kind of be waving the flag constantly. And it just got to the point where I still enjoyed it, but I wasn't enjoying it to the same level. And so I needed to take a step back and then augment what I was doing with my life. And in a lot of ways, that included getting my family involved in some of my activities or getting me involved in some of their activities. Like, you know, my girls and my wife, they all fly fish now. So it's cool that we can go out as a family and do that, especially at this time of year when the fishing is really good. And then we can transition to whitetail stuff. My girls like to come out and help on occasion. I mean, they're not going to be there every week if I'm there every week, but they do like in the spring to go and look for shed antlers. They're good for probably 2 days. And, you know, all 4 of us will go and we'll go look for some antlers. And, you know, I kind of try and make it fun for them and incentivize them. You know, we'll pin a $20 bill to the wall. Whoever finds the biggest shed gets $20. And nobody ever finds any sheds. So I know my money's not at risk, but, you know, it's good. I mean, we take the dogs and we just go and have a good time. And it's little instances like that are also filling their emotional bank account. So when it comes time where I do get crazy about hunting in the fall or in the late summer when there's, you know, a little bit of extra work to be done, you know, they feel whole and they don't feel abandoned by dad or, you know, the husband and go do their thing. And for me, that was just a way of getting myself to feel better and my family to feel better. And, you know, I'm always doing something like you are. I'm just always active, whether it's mentally or physically. And it couldn't be all whitetails all the time or all elk all the time. Sort of touching on elk, that was one of the things too that sort of pulled me away from whitetail. And I had to operate my hunting or my activities in the same way like I operate my businesses, in that I had to start kind of time blocking. And that's probably the best way to describe this is I started time blocking what I was doing at certain times a year. This time block, the major emphasis is fishing. And the next major emphasis is preparing for elk hunting. And then the third one is whatever. And again, that's amidst family and whatever else, because that's my ultimate priority. No matter what, they come first before everything. But, you know, and then as we transition to later parts of the summer, you know, fishing kind of starts to transition away. And then it's more being prepared for elk hunting. And then whitetail hunting takes a higher priority and fishing slides back. Training is always a cornerstone that I have in my life, but I'm just constantly sort of shifting my time and doing like what everybody else does with certain things, looking at the weather, deciphering opportunities that revolve around that, and then inserting activities into those things. And, it's just really worked for me.
Yeah. And you figured out, and I'm doing this too, is we with this message out there kind of, if you want to be a really successful whitetail hunter, you've got to devote so much time and energy to it. And I do think there is like a life space for that, right? I think like if you're relatively new to it, or you're, the 24-year-old with not a lot of other, commitments in life, man, go nuts, right? But
excuse me to interrupt you. I think the other time where you have to devote a lot of stuff is if you're hunting a new property, or you're let's say you bought a property or you leased a property and you're trying to develop it, that takes a huge investment of time too. So, that's a different life space as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I look at that. I see these two things differently in my head. Like that part of developing a property is really fun. The part of scouting nonstop and, just like diving headlong in there, sometimes that's not fun. And you kind of mentioned that, like when you got into the hunting industry, there is this like keeping up with the Joneses mentality you get. And believe me, I get this as like a first world problem, but I did the same thing when I went freelance. I was like, I've got to kill big bucks. And that was when I made the decision to do it on public land. And it was the least fun that I've ever had deer hunting. There were a few years there where I was like, I don't like this. And it was the pressure thing. And I just hadn't found that equilibrium of like, you don't have to, I personally don't have to go nuts every single day or every single week to be successful out there. And it actually works against me when I kind of push myself into that. And you mentioned something that I don't think we give nearly enough play to in this quest to be like a better whitetail hunter is, one of the first things you brought up is going fly fishing. And anybody who's paying attention to Mark's social media right now, that dude's out fly fishing like crazy all the time. Like he's not scouting deer nonstop. He's doing other things. And, you mentioned the elk thing and you're super, super passionate about that. And I really think that a life dedicated to lots of cool stuff outdoors just lifts you up in every aspect. And it's hard. It's a hard kind of connection to make with the whitetail thing. But when you're out there doing other stuff that makes you happy and you're out in the outdoors, it's going to make you better somehow. If for no other reason, like you said, then you'll just enjoy the time deer hunting more.
Yeah, for sure. And like at the risk of sounding like a total hippie, I mean, you have the opportunity to enjoy like little small aspects of certain things. Like I can't tell you how many times, so my mind is on fly fishing a lot right now. It will be through the end of the month because that's when our bugs are really good and whatever. But I'll go out and I'll go to a spot. I mean, they're not spots that I hunt, but I'll see something while I'm fly fishing, or I'll see some animal while I'm fly fishing or whatever. And it'll trigger me to think about a hunting situation. So strangely, because my world outside of my family is centered around whitetails, like many of us. I mean, the entire outdoor industry is centered around whitetails. It is the backbone of what we do and our ability to financially make a living. But like, there's just, I mean, whether it's a little behavior a bird does or watching a rabbit do something through the brush or whatever, I'll watch that, just kind of being a student of nature. And I'll go, oh, well, that's interesting. And it'll make me think of another dot. It'll make me pull another dot from somewhere else. And then my mind gets pulled into whitetails, but I'm not 100% consumed by it. And, I mean, I see some of these guys, especially like you said, on social, and it's just their solitary push. And I applaud them, but I'm not in that headspace. You nailed it. And when I was in my 20s, even my late teens, I mean, I was so ate up with deer hunting. I mean, I was so excited for deer hunting that I would literally wake up in the morning on a Saturday morning before I go deer hunting, and I couldn't eat because I'd throw up. Like I was just so excited about it. And, I I still love it, but I don't have that level of anxiousness about it anymore. And there's just a higher level. I don't want to say confidence, but there's just a different level of enjoyment. It's like, you hear about those 5 stages of a hunter, and I'm certainly not to the sportsman stage, but I'm very much in the process stage. And I think that's why I like compartmentalizing these different aspects of deer hunting, or these different aspects of my life. I'm just in that process stage, and that's wholesale. It's not just with hunting, it's with everything else.
Yeah. It's weird where you find yourself, because you think, you think something so important at one point, right? And then 5 years later, you don't care about it at all, and you move on to something else. And I've seen, you see it like sometimes with the, like you mentioned shed hunting, right? You're out there in New York, not primo Iowa shed hunting ground. Like you take the family out, you're probably not going to find one. I mean, we have the same thing here in the cities. But we go a lot, and I just find myself like, I don't care. Like I don't care if I find one or not. I love it when we do. I love it when my little girls do, especially. But it's just like, I just want to go walk in the woods. Like that's what this is for. And the shed is a bonus. And this is a message I'm trying to get across more and more with some of these podcasts and some of the writing, is the big buck thing doesn't matter as much as we think it does. Like it's not that important, and it's so, we get sucked into this in the hunting industry. I mean, trophies have been a part of hunting since, we've been hunting, and it's never going to go away. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but that emphasis on it and the kind of the laser focus on that, it's just not that important.
Yeah, I think it's just more of the holistic experience. I had one of my just top mentors who actually passed away a couple of years ago. I remember talking to him about the land that he owned and that he hunted, and I'd talk to him after, a hunt that he had and whatever else, and he'd tell me he went into a certain spot, and he would say, I didn't expect that I was going to have a good night in there. I just kind of had this feeling like I wanted to go. It was a nice day like today, and I wanted to go in there because I know the way the sun comes through the trees in there and the way the lighting is, and the last hour is just beautiful. And I wanted to experience that yesterday or whatever. And I remember at the time, again, I was in my late 20s or maybe even mid 20s, thinking to myself, like, what the hell is he talking about? And I've always had a high level of appreciation for that. One of the things I say to my wife all the time, one of the reasons why I love elk hunting so much, especially going to Colorado, is I get to see the leaves change twice. I get to see them change while I'm out west, and then I come home and I'm home for like 2 weeks, and then I get to see them change here again. And I just love that transition of the seasons and having the opportunity to experience that. And were it not for the fact that we're deer hunters or turkey hunters or fishermen or whatever, we wouldn't, I don't think, have the same level of appreciation for it and know what's happening with those trees to the same extent and why they're doing what they are. And I mean, how many times have you been sitting in a tree stand and a stiff breeze blows, right? And a whole bunch of yellow leaves just rain down on you, and you're like, man, that was cool. It's just one of those things. And again, I'm totally sounding like a hippie, but I dig all of that. And that's just created such a larger experience for me. And I look forward more to those moments so much that I don't want to stymie them by pushing so hard throughout other times of year. And I just have so many instances in my life that I can point to where it's like, yeah, you pushed too hard there and it burned you out. You know what I mean? I've definitely had burnout in all things, whether it's running or fishing or hunting or, even some family stuff, there's just a level of burnout. And personally, I need to offset, and that's how I keep from burning out. I was talking to somebody the other day about one of my businesses, and they're like, "You okay? You burned out? Are you feeling burned out?" I'm like, "Hell no, man! I have the highest level of energy for what I'm doing that I've ever had because I'm exercising different mental muscle and working on new things and doing things that I enjoy. And I make sure that my mom will always say to like honor yourself with time, or honor yourself. Like if you want a thing, find a way to get it and honor yourself with that thing. I mean, and I've found that balance. I'm not saying I'm in equilibrium every day, because there are days where I'm way out, but it seems like at this point, I'm in my 40s, and it seems like at this point I can keep a lot more balls in the air, and I'm just way happier. And I can think indelibly in my mind back to certain years where I was really, really happy and what was going on. I mean, when I was 32, I remember being really, really happy that year. My one business was just in a really good place. My first daughter was born. My second daughter was on the way, and we were just in good stages with kids. And like, I just remember, distinctly remember being really happy that year, and then, 2018, that was another year. Like, I just remember I was just really happy. I was working on some awesome projects with some awesome companies. I was doing a lot of running that year. I was training for very specific goals, and I was following my program very acutely. And I had my probably arguably my best hunting year ever that year, I can think of several of those throughout the course of my life. And it just seems like when everything's sort of clicking, it's clicking and it's great. But I was also making sure to accurately and acutely manage all the aspects of my life. So
let's talk about that.
Control. Let's
talk about that. Because you and Jace Bowserman are two people I know in my life who make me feel like I don't do anything. You guys make me feel like I'm lazy. And we don't need to go into it too much, but I started running and lifting and really, really chasing the fitness thing about 8 years ago when I quit drinking. And Jace, of course, was a huge inspiration to me, but so were you, because I was like looking at the trail running you were doing and the way that you operated, not only to hunt at home, to hunt out west. It's no small task to go from New York to Colorado to hunt. That's a big deal. And keeping yourself in elk shape all year. And I was just like, this is a good example to follow. And when you talk about like those great years you had where like you can remember, like I was happy at 32, I was happy at this age. Is it because you just had that discipline dialed in, so you were giving the things you needed as much time as they needed? I
think so. Yeah, I do. I think the other day you and I were talking on the phone, and I was talking about my whiteboard. There's a whiteboard in the background. I operate off a whiteboard. I operate off of spreadsheets, and I have, this is for business, but like I have 3 columns, like long term, tomorrow, today. And when I operate off that whiteboard, and I have a specific goal of what I want to get accomplished every day, percentage wise. When I operate off that whiteboard, I get more done, and I have a higher level of happiness because I can visually see my accomplishments every single day, right? So you look at things like, I was joking with you, I was logging my food right when we came on, right? And it's just, if we want to achieve a result, we have to have KPIs, right? We have to have these key performance indicators of what we're doing. So with logging your food, okay, we're calculating macros, or we're calculating calories, and we're calculating activity and how many calories you can eat and all that stuff. And at the end of the day, every day, you have a number that you can look at. And at the end of every week, you potentially have a number off the scale that shows the results. So, I strength trained harder over the winter, so I put on, and I ate differently, not in a good way, than I normally traditionally do over the winter. And I think it was sort of COVID related and whatever else, but like I put on some muscle mass and I put on some fat that came along with that. Now I'm looking at things, I'm going, man, I don't want to be carrying all this around in the elk woods. I want to try and keep what muscle I can. Well, the thing that I need to do is I need to control my nutrition in order to do that. And I know what years where I've had really good results at doing that are the years where I am really diligent about tracking. So that's one example of a place where if I'm managing and I'm tracking something, I see a result, and that result creates happiness. And the same thing holds true for hunting. And you and I've talked before on podcasts about like making your decisions off of data rather than making your decisions off of just out of a whim. And your gut is data sometimes, but if you're tracking all those things, again, you have those metrics to utilize as you're doing it. And I'm not saying like go and track stuff when it comes to your kids or any of that. You'll drive them crazy, right? They don't have the bandwidth for it. But in my world, when I'm keeping track of my stuff, I find the highest level of satisfaction and happiness because I'm accomplishing, and I know it because I'm keeping track, and
Yep.
maybe that's a little nerdish, but that's okay because that's what works for me.
Well, it's relevant because if you see, and I'm sure you get these too, but if you see the questions that you get from a lot of the listeners and a lot of the readers, they're kind of the same things over and over and over again. Like, what do you look for when you travel to, X state to hunt public land, or you're on a new property? What do you look for? And it's kind of these recurring themes over and over again. And what I find really hard, like the data that gets lost in the message is like my process, right? Like you have your process for managing your life because you're a busy guy and you're going to keep yourself in shape and you're going to do a lot of stuff to make sure you're happy in the whitetail woods and the elk woods, but that's yours. A lot of people listening to this are not tracking their calories. It's not going to happen. But
next year I probably won't be either.
But you've got this process down, and I know for me, like I don't go. Let's say I just pick a random state and I'm going to go hunt public land there. I don't say I have to have 10 waypoints drop that I think are badass spots, right? But I know inherently if I've done enough e-scouting or not. Like I know if I feel comfortable with the plan that I have in place, and that's where the enjoyment comes in. The enjoyment erodes when you're sitting there second guessing yourself going, man, I only have 2 spots. What if there's people in there? Or what if, it's blowing out of the south and I can't hunt either spot? And so developing some kind of discipline like that is just far as saying like this season I'm going into it, even if you're staying at home hunting a lease, like you might be in New York or you're going somewhere else, is like, are you happy with your plan? Like, do you have a plan first? And then do you have enough spots set up? And if you don't, if you can't put up a bunch of ladder stands or hang-ons, do you have enough trees that, you can saddle up in, or a couple ground blinds? Like how comfortable are you with not just like opening week and maybe the rut, but everything in between? Do you feel good about it? And when you start sort of, and you don't have to get like crazy analytical about it, but when you start looking at it in those ways and going like, am I going to be satisfied with this? It kind of prompts you to get after it a little more because that feeling when you weren't prepared sucks. And that you didn't kill deer when you went into it and going, man, I only have 2 stands up. This doesn't feel very good. I'll have to get them up later. It's not the best way to go about it for a lot of us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, there's a point of diminishing return when it comes to planning too, because there's an element of me that really does like to kind of freewheel and freelance and just go and hit a place that's new, or even hunting here at home. Like I couldn't go and tell you like structurally like, oh yeah, I'm going to hit this stand throughout the whole season. I mean, it literally just depends upon how the wind blows. Right. But I know that there are certain places on our farms that certain times a year on certain winds, there's a high likelihood that's going to happen. And that just comes with a high level of experience and being on the same dirt for a really long time. Obviously, when it comes to hunting, that you don't have that same transition if you're bopping around on public. If you go hunt elk or mule deer or whitetails in another place, I generally I really like a lot of what like Mark Levisay has to say. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but Heat Tree Line Pursuits. But like Mark talks about having like a hunt plan for elk hunting, and then these are your spots, and this is looking for certain terrain features and whatever else. I really go into my Western hunts with those series of things. But what I've learned over the years is a lot of times, like you're saying, like e-scouting, something looks like one thing on the computer, and then you get there and you're like, oh gosh, this isn't what I had envisioned at all. Because I don't care how good you are at e-scouting. Like there's just an element of it that there's a separation between digital and reality. And I mean, I could speak to that specifically. 2018, Wyoming, my hunting partner Eric and I went out, and we get there, and the terrain was totally different than I had expected. And I remember like literally pulling in. I'm like, oh, Eric, I think a bunch of my hunt spots are going to be bad. Like we're not going to be able to go to them at all, And a few of them definitely were, and some of them turned out to be exactly what we had hoped they would be. But there's just, but we did, like we freewheeled it once we found certain terrain features that the elk seemed to be favoring, given that time of year and the level of pressure that there was and whatever else. We'd be driving down the road, and you could even see stuff from the road. You can obviously see some topographical features and whatever else. We're like, you know what? Let's just, for giggles, let's go try that spot tomorrow morning and see what happens. And we hit pay dirt really well by doing that, and it was super fun. And that year we actually got displaced from our original hunt area because there was a really big wildfire, and we had to go to another area in the unit. And I think we only had, between the two of us, like 2 hunt areas planned out in that spot. Everything else was on the other side of the unit. Well, I mean, we got in there and it was lights out. I mean, just awesome hunting. And we were already experiencing awesome hunting before that. So you got to be flexible. I mean, I think that comes back to the happiness thing. Yep. If I get too regimented, then like I was saying, my degrees of satisfaction for whatever activity there is starts to diminish as well. And then it becomes no fun. And, then I become like an ADD kid. Okay, we're moving on. Let's do this. So.
Well, the thing that you brought up there with the e-scouting, that is the reality we don't talk about much, where you're going to get it wrong most of the time. You just do. And so you get in, but what it is sometimes you get it right, and that's freaking awesome. But most of the time you're going to get it wrong, but it's getting you in there to look around, and it's going to get you into these different spots. And you go, okay, well, I walked in here and this thing sucks. Okay, well, let's knock it off the list. You're just eliminating dead water, like they say when you're fishing, But it's also, it gives you this really good lesson. And when you talk about elk, this gets driven home to you so hard when you elk hunt. You might get the e-scouting right, you might get it wrong, but when you get in there and you're actually looking around, just trust the sign. Trust all the sign that you see. And when we talk about sign all the time as rubs and scrapes, but it's deer poop, and it's trails, and it's tracks, and it's just general deer usage. That stuff doesn't lie. And so often, and this, when you go in and you hike into a spot that you're like, this is going to be the most badass funnel in the world. And you get in there and you look around and like, they're not there. But 300 yards from the truck, you crossed 4 trails that are all hubbed together for some reason. You're like, oh, this is too close. This is not where I need to be. And you realize, like, I should have just listened to that. I mean, if you go hunt whitetails enough, or elk, you just run into so many of those situations where you just doubt it because it doesn't fit into the plan you built. You're like, okay, this sign looks good, but who cares? I'm going to, my number one spot. And then you end up circling back to that place that you didn't expect. And it was all just written right there, plain as day. And you have to have a few of those stinging lessons before you really start to listen to that stuff, I think.
Well, and what you're describing in my mind is like experiential data, right? And you can carry those pieces of experience with you into each one of the new experiences that you're trying to create. So you can walk in, and I mean, you've proven this better than anyone. You can walk into a piece of new ground, public, private, or whatever, and just look at certain things and generally be able to identify within coarse proximity of where the animals are going to be, right? And it doesn't matter whether it's elk, antelope, whitetails, mule deer. Like once you start understanding what makes all of those species tick, like you can see stuff. My friend Josh, turkey hunting, just bandit. The guy's crazy about them, they're just his thing. And I talked to him about e-scouting for turkeys, and I think to myself, like, just listen for them gobbling, like then go to them. And I don't profess to be the world's, most enthusiastic turkey hunter, but he's got a whole system and a whole process and certain things that he looks for and distances and everything else. And that dude can walk onto a piece of ground and within 3 days kill a bird. Boom. You know what I mean? Just done. And, for some people they're like, well, yeah, of course, but they've got that experiential data. Right. And for other people, they're like, oh, wow, that's pretty impressive, and so I don't know. But all of those things, going back to what we keep talking about, are like, those are the things that make you happy. Those are the things that, increase those degrees of satisfaction with what you're doing. And you're taking all these elements and mashing them together toward levels of success.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's, your buddy who's e-scouting for turkeys, that, I talk a lot about traveling to public land, running and gunning and kind of mixing in a deer scouting and a turkey hunting plan or a turkey hunting trip. But you really do see that, if you're heading, so you're going to go down to Nebraska and you're going to go bow hunt turkeys or run and gun them in the sandhills or whatever, you are going to be you're going to e-scout a lot, right? Like you're going to be looking for certain things and you're going to be poring over that the available information you have. That doesn't make you a worse deer hunter, and this is one of the things I always try to, nobody listens to me, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Like bow hunting turkeys, especially if you travel to public land to bow hunt turkeys, the parallels between that and finding deer hunting spots they're way closer than you'd think. And it's partially just because turkeys like to walk certain places just like deer do, and oftentimes they're the same places. I mean, I have hunting here around the Twin Cities where the best turkey spots to bow hunt are, these little spines between two wetlands where they're going from, food to roost or whatever. And who walks through there too? All the freaking deer. Like there's no difference, right? Or if there's an open gate or something stupid like that, we kind of have undersold the extra value of turkeys besides they're awesome because they gobble and you could shoot them in the face with a shotgun. But again, kind of like when you're out there fly fishing somewhere,
yeah,
and you see some little thing happen, something that levels up your critter sense just a little bit. The same thing happens when you're turkey hunting. The same thing happens if you go out small game hunting, if you're pheasant hunting with your dog in the late season. All of that stuff clues you into these little things in nature that just make you a better hunter. It's woodsmanship, maybe.
That's exactly right. Going back to the anecdote I talked about earlier with the watching the rabbit while I'm walking into a fly fishing hole. I mean, that is, perfect example of woodsmanship, right? You're paying attention to a thing. How many times have you dropped your boat into a place that you've never fished before, and you're just, you're looking at your depth finder or whatever, and it's like, oh, okay, well, look at that. There's a rock pile right there. Yeah, there's probably going to be some smallies on that rock pile because everywhere else there's smallies on rock piles like that. It's just, it's the same thing with fly fishing. Like I can go onto a piece of water that I've never fished before, and I'm patient, so I'll just stand and wait and watch, but I'll just watch what the water's doing, or obviously with polarized glasses you can see a lot of the bottom of the and where depths change and whatever else, and just I look for things that I like, and then I feel confident in that spot more than if I see things that I don't like, obviously. So then I'll end up wetting a line, and sometimes it pans out and sometimes it doesn't, but that's also what keeps us kind of coming back for more, so but what to look for, I guess. Ultimately, that's what we're talking about. Turkeys, everything. So.
Well, I think it goes even deeper than that. I had this kind of light bulb moment probably about, I don't know, I think 4 years ago, something like that. I went pheasant hunting, and it was I think probably back half of November. We didn't have snow yet, but anyway, we went out. I was hunting with my wife's uncle. We hit this little 40-acre chunk that had a cattail slough, and then it had just a bunch of CRP grass, and then there were private ag fields across the fence, and so most people go in and they walk the fence line. They've seen this they've studied this habit in upland hunters a lot. They know we follow the same routes all the time. The pheasants figure that out. And we had gone out and we had hunted the way most people do. Then we cut through the middle, and we ended up, I think we killed 3 birds out of there. I don't think we got our limit, but we got close. And I just remember like sitting at the truck, we were watering the dogs, And I was like, I think we killed those pheasants in a staging area because they were full. Their crops were full. They'd already gone out and eaten and they'd come back, but they weren't back in the really thick, gnarly stuff. They were kind of in this little transition zone. And when you spend time doing that stuff, or like you mentioned the smallies, like they go up on the bank and they spawn, right? And then they back off and they recover a little bit, maybe a little bit deeper water. And then they move into their summer pattern where they might be on those deeper rock piles, and everything happens for a reason. Like there isn't a lot of randomness there, and like, I think it's easy to look at pheasants or rabbit hunting or something like that and go, well, it's just, there's just randomness. Like they're just here because they live here. Well, they're right here in this specific spot right now for a reason. The same thing happens, if guys go elk hunting, it's like, well, I'm going to bugle in a bull because they're out covering ground everywhere and somebody's going to come in. And those elk are hanging around the cows because those cows are living their life to not get shot and not get bumped all around. And they're feeding in these meadows at midnight and they're doing whatever. And there's a total method to the madness. Like it's not random, just like with the whitetail rut. The more we study that, there's a lot less randomness to it. And I'm sure there's some randomness to it, but when you start figuring out those trout that are, in the negative feeding pattern, they're just hanging there and you can see them, they're not doing anything. And all of a sudden they move down to that seam below that rock. Now he's eating. Like all of that stuff feeds this level of just like, okay, I have a little more confidence now because I'm not relying on crossing my fingers and hoping that buck comes by. I assume he's here and he wants to be there and I'm going to go between.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, we experience it all the time. I mean, there's nothing that happens in nature, I think. Well, sorry, that's an absolute statement. But there's few things that happen in nature just randomly. We want to believe that it happens randomly, but I struggle with that. I mean, that you could take that into so many other conversations, but like, it's kind of back to the food thing. There's nothing that happens randomly with food. Fuel does certain things for you and it has a direct result, and everybody's a little bit different, but I don't know, you got to just pay attention to those trends, I guess, whether they're personally or other things.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you could make the case, if you sit there and watch, let's say you're back in some kind of staging area and you're watching a buck kind of make a few rubs and he's kind of browsing around. He might randomly walk 75 yards your way and browse over there. Like that might just be like a little whim he has, right? But him being there in that spot at that time probably isn't random.
Right.
For
sure.
It's the same thing like, the elk, the bull that you run into that's just screaming his goddamn head off and he's a gift, like in a place you don't expect. Like, yeah, maybe he got his ass kicked and he's going to look for somebody else or something. And there might be an element of randomness to it, but there's probably so much going on that we don't understand that it's just like, it's easier for us just to default to that explanation because we will never know.
I have an example of the elk thing. I'm talking like I have elk are my primary thing, and they're not. But like we were in Colorado in 2017, and we're literally in our campsite in a campground, and we're just there having lunch. We had hunted in the morning, and I just so happened to set up my spotting scope, and it's just sitting there on the tripod. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe it was in preparation for going to glass something that evening or whatever. And we're literally sitting in camp chairs. I got my spotter next to me on the right, and I just see this giant ass bull start walking. This is a campsite that's like right off of a major road. There's no rhyme or reason in my mind why that bull is out cruising in this is midday to go and look for cows. I mean, that's just like you see out of a whitetail buck, head down, trying to fill those olfactory glands, whatever. That's exactly what he's doing, right? He is just cruising. And I'm like, why would he be up in that spot? That makes no sense to me. Well, I didn't have any experience with that area. So that evening we decide we're going to at least go and try and, not even that evening, after we watched him walk off, we thought he went into this one little draw, and then it went down to a big reservoir actually. Well, lo and behold, when we went over there, they had clear cut. The beetle kill was really bad in that area, and they had clear cut this whole area, and it was all these all these young conifer trees that were growing back. And then where that bull had walked was actually like a big spine, right? And just before it took a big drop, there was this heavy, thick, brushy area. So that bull was basically going from one big block of timber that we couldn't figure out from our location, and then going through those two areas essentially that were likely bedding areas, working the wind and the thermals to his advantage, and then going down into this other block of timber to take security. And we never caught up with that bull. Obviously, never killed him or anything. But it's just one of those things where you look at something on the surface and you go, well, that, like, there's nothing there, and that seems so random, but it wasn't random at all. Like, he was totally working around the people. I mean, it was a real eye opener for me, to be honest with you. It just showed that there's always purpose, you know what I mean, or something that's happening with those animals. There's always purpose. I
think that's part of the reason winter scouting is so popular for whitetails right now is, you hunt all season on a property, and then, you kill something, you don't, whatever. But in March, you go in there and you just walk through everything. You don't have those reservations like, I don't want to go into what I think is the better. You just look at everything and you go, man, they were using this like crazy. Or with the woods being as wide open as it is, you're like, I see this perfect little subtle ridge that I never paid attention to before. And I'll tell you what, man, I started it when I have the opportunity, and it's totally random, but if I kill a buck somewhere and I have a few days, like if I'm hunting with my buddies, and my favorite thing is if I kill something early and all I have to do is scout and help everybody else out and take some pictures. I love going into the places that I either killed one or I had a good encounter and really sniffing around right after, just to see why did he come down this hill, or where was he going, or what was really, like, what's the bigger picture here besides I saw this deer come down and do this thing. And it's so valuable, man. Like and then you can keep kind of going back to it. The example that I like to use is that I ran across this really big buck in northern Wisconsin a couple of years ago, like a 160, just a killer buck, public land, big woods deer, And what he did caught me so off guard, and I ended up killing a different buck that night. And so the next day, I'm like, I'm going back in there. I just want to look around. Like, I wanted to see this rub he made just because I kind of wanted to go look at it. But I was like, it was like such a cool thing to see, and such a big deer in such a weird place. I'm like, I just got to go in there. Like, I want to just know. And I went back in there, and it was like so much more benchy. Like, it felt like a elk spot, right? Like when you walk in there and you're like, okay, there's halfway down this hill or these bluffs, there's like this perfect bench. And it was like, the picture became so much more clear. And I went back in there last winter and walked around again and went up there, went farther back into this property and found just a few more things, like this really interesting edge between, it must be between like I don't know, 20 years ago they must have logged it, and then 10 years ago they must have logged it. There's an edge in there, and it's not like it's a soft edge, but it's like obvious. And he was tucked in. There was a big bed tucked in back there 50 yards beyond that. And it made me, that one sighting and that one really cool night sitting on stand, I'm like, I feel like I got lucky with that. Even though I had scouted quite a bit to get in there, I didn't know 2% of what was going on in there. And I still feel like I know about 9%, but right. I feel like that's still valuable because it starts to explain, like, okay, you'll never know why he was actually there, but it sure looks like he was using those benches a lot, and he had a lot of advantages being in there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That exploration and that opportunity to learn something new is so much fun, but it's the same stuff that you've learned in other places, just applied to a new spot. And now you've got that cashed out in your mind and okay, ready for the next time you go back there, which is cool.
Yeah. Do you know where I think the most valuable, what could be the most valuable time you could spend in the woods, like along this vein is going in after a gun season. Like go in after the general gun season ends, like a day later, and walk through everything and figure out where you jump the deer, because it's like, I'm sure you've done this out in New York. Like, it's such a freaking eye opener sometimes where they hole up and how many deer can hole up in a spot that don't go into because you can't shoot far. And it's such, I think it would be the best strategy for being a rifle hunter in a place that gets a lot of pressure. Yes,
definitely. Yeah. We experience plenty of that here. And, sometimes people talk about, I remember reading a Jim Shockey article way back when he used to write for North American Hunting Club. He talked at how, I believe it was Jim Shockey, he said that he didn't believe that deer went nocturnal. He believed they went bushturnal. And that's kind of exactly what you're talking about, right? So you take that core area and shrink it way down. You could probably still experience some pretty good activity, but you have to kind of be like right in that spot or right adjacent to that little spot where they're taking refuge, especially during those higher pressure seasons like we experience here, Wisconsin gets, and Pennsylvania and Michigan. They don't just up and disappear, and they don't crawl underground like squirrels or rabbits. So they got to be somewhere. So, yeah. But I'm always blown away by how many deer will congregate together that time of year. Yep. I mean, it's just unbelievable, because they're all going to take refuge in small areas.
Yeah. I had such a cool lesson on this when I was like probably 13 or 14 years old. We used to hunt this area in southeastern Minnesota that we had permission on a bunch of different properties. It was a lot of land, and it was kind of like this giant peninsula looking piece of land that was framed in by the Root River. So it was a lot of bluffy, bluff country type stuff. And there was a cabin that we stayed in. It was one of my dad's friends. And so we would, we'd stay there, and then you'd go out, walk, or, drive down the road and park or whatever. But we always originated from there. And then during the gun season, the places we could hunt would kind of shrink because some of those landowners only gun hunted, and we were bow hunting. And my dad one time wanted to just keep hunting during the gun season. So he said, well, I'm just going to drop over the hill behind the cabin down that just went straight down to the river, where we never, ever went because there's nothing there. And he went down there and was covered in deer. And he's like, you got to go down there. And there was an old permanent stand like 4 feet off the ground on this hillside, And I will never forget, because for us at that time, when the Minnesota gun season started, our bow season was kind of functionally over. Like we would get back into it a little bit in the late season, but we had weeks where it was like we usually couldn't hunt or wouldn't hunt. And then, you got that hangover period after the gun season where it's just tough if you're on pressured ground. And I remember walking over that hill and seeing a buck stand up and just like, holy shit, I've never seen that in my life, And he was like a 2-year-old, which to us then is like a 170 now.
Right.
And he took off, and I just went and got in that stand, and almost immediately, I can't remember how many deer I missed that night. I think I missed 3 times. I can't remember exactly, but I had does come through, and I missed only does, but it was like, I saw like 11 deer that night, and it was one of the most amazing times I've ever had on stand. And I just remember hearing gunshots and going into it thinking, this is going to be a total waste of time, because all I've ever thought in my life is when gun season starts, it's over. And all those deer did was just congregate in this one bluff side, over the river, where people didn't go. And, we burned it right out after a couple days, but it stuck with me to this day.
Yeah. Yeah. There was nothing in there, right, by your description, except all of the deer.
Yeah. More deer than I've ever seen in one sit in my life,
Right. Yeah.
But I think that I could point to so many times in my life, hunting life, where that's happened. And I just love it. I love it in the same way I love these people out there like Alex Honnold, who climbed El Cap, the free solo dude. And I love people who show us what can't be done. And I love seeing those things where you're like, I know for a fact this is not going to work, and then it works. I think we need that stuff in life, and I think that's part of like a sneaky reason why we're so drawn to hunting.
Absolutely. I mean, again, kind of going back to an earlier part of the conversation, I think that's why some of us are self-employed too. We just look at it and we go, yeah, I gotta try and figure out how to do it on my own. I need to find that edge of failure. And if I cross it, I know that I got to step back. Hopefully it's not catastrophic failure, but I mean, we're just towing that line all the time, and that's okay with me. I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, it's nice to have support without a doubt when there's opportunities, but I personally I like taking that risk. I mean, it's the same thing like why we do these challenging activities physically too. It's kind of taking that risk and challenging yourself and seeing where the edge is for you. And everybody's edge is different, but I like to test that boundary, even to the point where some days, this morning is a perfect example. Like I found myself at the gym and I was like, that's pretty rough. I'm gonna stop at this many reps or whatever. And I was like, no, kind of check yourself. No, you're gonna experience growth when you challenge yourself and challenge that boundary. And some days I'm more motivated to do it than others too.
Yeah, well, motivation's like happiness. It's a moving target, man.
Yeah, that's the way that's true.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co and make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
So we had a conversation the other day, and we got on this topic, and I didn't want to talk about it anymore because I wanted to talk about it on this podcast. But what do you say to people who say they don't have time? Because this happens all the time with the workout stuff. This happens with the hunting. Like, well, yeah, if I had the time to scout that you do, if I had the time to run that you do, what do you say to people? Because you're a busy guy and you make the time.
My feeling is, and it's okay that this is the case. My feeling is that you don't have the priority. If you don't have the time, then you don't have the priority, and that's all right if that's your answer. But I think we need to be a little bit more honest with ourselves in that capacity. So, like, I had a conversation not all that long ago, and someone was asking me if I had done something or gone and seen something or whatever, and I was literally just about to like have the words "I haven't had time" cross my lips, and I was like, whoa, hold on. And I stopped myself and I said, it just hasn't been on my priority list just yet. It was higher and it sort of fell down in lieu of other things. So, that's the thing. For the things that we really want, we make time, and if that's elk hunting, we make time. If it's training, we make time. If it's family, we make time. And people ask me all the time, they're like, man, how do you run businesses and do this? And do you ever see your family? Yeah, man. I have dinner with my family 5 nights a week. I cook the majority of those meals. But kind of back to my thing about time management earlier, I time block for that. And some nights are really basic, breakfast for dinner, we're having eggs or pancakes or whatever, simple things. But, because that's what we've been able to earmark. But, and then other things are a little bit more extravagant, a 4-hour Hank Shaw recipe that I'm checking on midday as I'm doing everything else in my office at home. I'm fortunate in that I work from home, but I think, in the wake of the pandemic, a lot of people are fortunate that they work from home. And, I'm just not one of these types of people who gets distracted by things. I don't get distracted by the refrigerator. I don't get distracted by the television. I rarely get sucked into the YouTube vortex that often anymore. It happens on occasion, but it's rare, because that whiteboard tells me the stuff that I have to get done every day for business. And if that doesn't get done, then that spills over into personal things. My kids will always joke with me. They're like, "Dad, how come your phone gets to use the charger in the truck more when we need it? We got to do our games." And I'm like, "Because this is the one that makes the money. This is the one that makes it so we can go and do whatever, But that's the same thing. If you transition that, it's a matter of priority. And for me, kind of where we started, there are certain times where, whitetail scouting falls down my priority list, or going to trim a tree stand, or, maybe I couldn't do it during daylight hours. So, I have to do it after dark. And people are like, "What? How the hell do you do that?" And it's like, man, you got to get a really good headlamp, and, you go in and you start, especially when you know your ground, but you make it happen. And, instead of laying in bed and scrolling Instagram, I'll be doing that. And I'm not trying to paint myself as like I'm working or grinding or doing whatever all the time. I mean, I take plenty of time to sit down and have a campfire with my kids, or, I walk my dogs with my wife just about every night. And that's about a 40-minute walk. And that's time for her and I to catch up. And I love that time. I have a GSP, as you know, Tony, and I don't always love walking that GSP, but because she struggles to be a lady sometimes, but but I love that time with my wife, and I think she enjoys the time with me too. And we always talk about things, and we get a lot accomplished. And that's something that I set time aside for. And then we usually come home and we have a chore or two to do, and we do that, and we get the girls ready for bed. And I might have to grab a few more minutes for work, or phone up on a phone call, or maybe that's or whatever. But it's just a matter of priority. If you want something, you make it. And that, for me, that's bled through with business too. I mean, if I want to make a deal happen, or I want to, I don't know. I have to invest the time into it. And if I don't, then it wasn't that important to me. And again, that's my choice, and that's okay if that's somebody's choice. I don't judge them for that, but I just really struggle with that excuse. My one buddy can send me like 20 podcasts, right? And he'll be like, "You got to listen to these podcasts." And I'm like, that I'll say I don't have time for, because it's not a priority for me. Because like we've talked about, I don't really listen to music when I run or train. I don't really listen to podcasts. I'm solely focused on that. And I'm not trying to paint myself as being this like really staunch disciplinarian on myself. That's just how I operate best. And I know if I kind of put in the deliberate practice on something, it works best for me. And, I'll grab a podcast in the truck when I'm driving somewhere, or, I go to the post office a couple days a week, and, go to the post office, listen to half a podcast on the way there, the other half on the way home. And, that works. Or I'll take a little detour to go check out one of my running spots or a fishing spot, or, whatever, and gives me a few extra minutes and that type of thing. But those are my priorities, and that's what's meaningful to me. So I invest in them.
Yep. Well, and when you talk about, making the time to go cut shooting lanes, or doing it when you can, I think that message, when this really became something I had to do, when you have two babies at the same time, your free time goes, it doesn't, I don't give a shit what anybody says. Like, all of a sudden your world changes. Right. And so that was, when that happened, it was like, okay, now you're going to have, instead of 7 or 10 days to hunt, you're going to have 4 days for this trip. Or instead of making 4 or 5 trips to southeastern Minnesota or over to Wisconsin to hang stands and put up cameras and do all this stuff, you're going to have 2 days this summer or 4 days this summer. It really made me go, man, I was taking sort of the easy way out a lot of times where I'd go, get a stand up. Okay, that was good enough for today. Let's go catch some trout or something like that. And now, or, when something like that happens in your life, you have those moments where it's like, okay, you got to get this stuff done. You're going to have enough time if you really bust your ass. So do that and get it done. And you start to realize like how efficient you can be with some of this stuff. And it's kind of like, you talk about the work from home thing versus going into the office. Like when you go from an office job that's a 9 to 5 or to working from home, you're like, man, I used to waste a lot of time in that cubicle.
Yeah.
Because I had to be there for 8 hours and I had 3 hours of work that day. And so you make the rounds and you talk to people and you drink a bunch of coffee and you go out for a long lunch and you realize it makes you a little bit more aware of time. And it's the same thing when you have those moments in your life. Like, when we had the girls, I'm like, okay, now my time, I took it for granted before how much time I had. I don't have that anymore. So I better use it much more wisely. I know you've had a few moments in your life where I'm sure that's happened. And one of them, for the listeners, your wife had to battle cancer not that long ago. I'm sure that was one of those moments in your life where you're like, okay, this time is the commodity that I'm worried about now. This is important.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that was the biggest perspective changer for me. There was no more room for procrastination because I'm human, right? So procrastination still creeps into my life. And, I would procrastinate before. I mean, not miserably because I was always a get shit done kind of guy, but it was just different. And when she was sick, I mean, it just obviously takes everything and kind of turns it on its ear. And, she had chemo, every other week. And then it was just, balancing things around that schedule. So that was like the center of everything. Every Wednesday she had treatment for these hours. And then, generally she would feel good. And I went with her to every single treatment. And, and then by Friday was when she would start to not feel well. Or Thursday evening into Friday, the chemo would catch up with her. She would start not to feel well. And so we made a plan. We were fortunate, and then we had really good support with our families. Both of our moms and dads were really supportive and helped us out a lot. But we built out a structure. But back to the doing stuff at night thing. I mean, that's candidly where all that came from. As soon as she would fall asleep on Friday evening, usually early, I was out the door to go do work. And I mean, I did it the entire time that she was sick because I wasn't taking anything away from her. And we had already sort of vetted out that she generally wouldn't need me. She just needed to sleep. She wanted to need to be without disruption. And it wasn't like I was super far away. I was 25 minutes away. So if she did need me, I could get home quick. But I knew I had things that I needed to do. Or, I didn't elk hunt that year. I drew a really good tag that I surrendered. But I still made time to train. I just swapped my schedule around, getting up a little bit earlier or doing it at night after she would go to bed and whatever else. Cause I was just, again, managing my priorities. But like you said, what really changed there is my daughters at the time, I have 2 girls and they were 4, if I remember this right. Yeah, they were 4 and 8. So as you can imagine, as kids at that age, they're independent to a certain extent, but they still aren't independent enough where they can just run roughshod or fully take care of themselves. I mean, shoot, right now, they would live on cereal if we'd let them. So, that's just one small example, but they required a lot of stuff and mom wasn't always able to step into that role. She did an amazing job and she was incredibly strong, far stronger than I could ever be. And I could ever sort of imagine being, but, I had to step into places where candidly, I wasn't used to being, because she, for a long time, she couldn't lift anything. And she, there was just all sorts of things that I took for granted is the best way that I can describe it. And one of those things that I took for granted was the freedom that she allowed me by the time that she gave me to go do my own things. And that was the priority shift was, okay, she's given up a lot of her life and a lot of her time so I can have it. And, the real eye opener was there was a lot of things that I was doing in my life at that point that I had tricked myself into thinking I was doing for my family or for whatever. And it was not, it was just for me. I was trying to, at work, I was trying to achieve and earn at a high level. And I was saying like, oh, I want to do this to support my family. It wasn't, it was to fuel my ego, or it was to fuel a part of me that was missing or whatever. And like, and so when that all happened, I realized like what mattered, what didn't matter, and realigned and recentered my entire life. And I do find myself on occasion like drifting out. The other day I was like, okay, this year I drew a Montana elk tag, and I was like, okay, the Montana's dates are a little bit later, and the person that I'm hunting with is saying like, come later in the month. I'm like, can I maybe squeeze in, can I buy a landowner tag in Colorado or New Mexico and squeeze in a little extra time or whatever? And I'm like, hey man, no, too much time away from family, too much time away from business. Like, no, just come to the resolve that you got a really good tag, focus your energy on that, make that your priority. Don't fragment yourself. And, that's been one of the big lessons for me, and is a really big capstone in my life with all of this stuff.
Yeah. When you, I have to imagine like that experience, it makes you just hyper cognizant of how lucky you are to still get to do this stuff. And probably, I don't know about you. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but I get into this weird space where I can't wait to leave. I'm like, oh my God, I can't wait to go on this hunting trip. And then you get out there for a few days and it's like, God, I really miss my kids. Like I really miss my family. But yeah, if you have, and this is a missing component of great trips for most people, is if things are good at home, if everybody's happy, work's good, they're not calling you, your spouse is happy, your kids are happy. Those are the trips that you go out and you come back, and whether you kill something or not, you're like, that was freaking worth it. That's why I do it. And I'm sure you've seen this with your hunting partners, especially doing a bigger, Western hunt, which is a big commitment for you guys out there in the Northeast. Like you get out there, you get on the road, you got 2 days on the road, and then you get out there and you're 2-3 days in the backcountry, and all of a sudden your hunting partner is like not having it anymore and thinking about getting back, or the wife's calling all the time, and it changes the whole dynamic. And it's a hard thing to get through until you've done a few of these trips and have that, you have that homeostasis, right? Like, how to make sure everything's going to be good at home, so you can go do this thing and really appreciate it, not feel guilty, not worry about getting back home. And just, that's like, we don't talk about that a lot. We kind of glorify this traveling hunting stuff because, we've figured out how to really enjoy it, but we figured out how to enjoy it because we've been through a lot of the bullshit that can happen and make it not fun. And that doesn't get talked about a whole lot.
It's funny, for me, it takes a few days to sink in before I can actually enjoy it. I'm usually sort of stressed out during the travel process because we pretty much drive everywhere, so we have control over our gear and stuff. But like, so if we go to Idaho, that's like a 32-hour drive for us from here. And, so I'm spending 32 hours like biting my nails, catching up on all my emails. And then the next 3 days while I'm transitioning and sort of letting myself unwind and get focused on the hunting and whatever, I'm just not on my game. And then I'll get in the zone, and then I just really recognize my own faults, or starting to recognize my own faults. Then I'm good for a few days, and then I kind of pop out and I'm not good again. I get anxious about what's going on at home. I get anxious about business and other things. And if I have enough time, I'll drift back in and then feel comfortable. But, when I used to do stuff again, back in my 20s and when the kids were young, I'd just be like, man, if I had 1 or 2 more days, and now I find myself, I get to the end of the trip and I'm cutting a trip a day short or a half a day short or whatever. Cause I'm like, I got to call it quits at this point. Like, I'm done. My mind is not here. It's here. And, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about this too. And I was saying, like, when I get to that point, what I really need to do is go to town, catch up on all my emails, spend an hour on the phone with my wife, getting a full data dump, talk to all the people that I need to talk to, get comfortable again, maybe go fish for an afternoon, wet a line or an evening or whatever, get my mind off of elk hunting or deer hunting or whatever. And then the next day kind of dive back into it, knowing that I have however many days left, or we have however many days left, and, have that full immersion and that full commitment. And, it's taken me a, again, that's a newer phenomenon for me. Like I would say within the last 5 years, but it's taken me a few years to really identify that fault in myself. Because of the way my mind works, I just get anxiety about things. It's one of the reasons why I train so much and everything else. And it's just, when I'm away from those things, it's, again, especially being a business owner, there's I don't have a huge business. I don't have like a bunch of employees. I don't have a bunch of people that I can delegate things to. So if I'm not doing things are falling because they're my responsibilities. They're falling. I can't scale them into something else, or someone else. And, I have to pay attention to those. And, I've just identified that about myself, and I've had to change how I operate. I mean, case in point, 2 weekends ago, I went down to the Catskills in New York here. We have a camper. I pulled my camper down there, and I left Friday night. So I didn't take any time off Friday. I left after normal work hours, drove down, got my rig set up, went out and did an hour of fishing. But where I was camping, no cell phone service at all. And so, which is awesome, because no cell phone service at all, but tolerable because no cell phone service at all. I was like freaking out, for 2 days. I was just like, oh gosh, and I'd run into town and call home and check in or whatever. But it just stressed me out. And then finally on Sunday, I was coming home Monday morning. Finally on Sunday, I kind of dipped into the groove just in time to go home, and I was saying to my wife as I was driving home, I'm like, I finally kind of get to the point, where I'm fully starting to relax, and then I have to come home. I was fortunate in that we were going back to the same place the following weekend. I left the camper down there and whatever else. So I knew I had some more days to earmark and whatever. But, that's just the way that my mind works. And I have to acknowledge that and not try and fight certain things or figure out ways to hack it or improvement. And I just haven't gotten to that point yet.
Yeah,
so
it's a weird thing when you realize that, we talk about hunting as something that we just love and we're obsessed with and we can't wait to go do. But there are times when you go on a trip, or there's times where you go hunting where you're like, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be doing this. I don't want to be here. And that's a weird thing to talk about. I mean, I talk about this a lot with like excuses, right? Like people say, oh, I'm not going to sit because it's too hot. I'm not going to sit because it's too windy. I'm like, don't you want to hunt? Like, why are you making excuses to go? And yet I'll go on trips where I've done the same thing. There's been times where I'm like, I don't ever want this to end. Like, I want to just keep going. And then there's times where I'm like, I'm considering going home 3 days early. Like I'm out. I'm in the wrong headspace, or just something. It's hard to manage. And even if you get to do it a lot, like you and I are both pretty lucky. We've done a lot of hunting trips and spent a lot of time out there solo, spent a lot of time out there with buddies, and you just never know when that's gonna hit you. And it just is the reality of the game. And I'll never forget, like, you talk about having a good support system at home. I think it was 3 years ago. I was out in North Dakota in the middle of October, and my buddy who was with me, he had to go home early. So I had a couple. I think I had 5 days to hunt, and he had to leave after like day 3 or something. We had kind of, he had got there earlier, and then he had to go, and then I got there a little later and could stay later, whatever. And I kind of got my ass kicked, and then I had these bucks dialed. Had 3 of them coming in. It was like a 90 to 130 incher, 3 of them browsing their way in. They had like 45 minutes to cover 60 yards. I'm like, this is over. Whichever one gives me the best shot. You could just see it, like, this is working. Everything's right. And then I had some dude drive in down this 2-track where they're not supposed to be driving, blew the whole goddamn river bottom out. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, it took me days to get on these deer. And it was just, the worst part about it was the river bottom exploded. There was deer freaking running everywhere. And I saw those headlights. God damn it. And so I was watching him, and I knew the bucks in front of me had taken off. And so I'm just like in my stand. I'm like, I guess, I'll ride it out or whatever. But, done. I'm like, mentally, I'm gone. And I moved, and I looked down, and one of those bucks hadn't spooked. And he was still in the willows right by the river, and he was looking right at me, and he ran away. And I was just like, I can't freaking win, man. And I went back to camp that night, and I think I was supposed to leave the next day or 2 days later. And I had also been on, there was another spot that was really tricky to hunt with the wind, but there were big ones on it. And I just couldn't get in there. I kept trying to talk myself into it. And anyway, I went home, or I went up on the hill, called my wife. I'm like, I'm coming home. And she's like, well, aren't you on those big ones in that other spot? And I was like, yeah, but it's a freaking lost cause. Like, and she just talked me into it. She's like, just stay. Everything's fine here. You got nothing else going on. Just stay and ride it out. And I ended up not being able to hunt that spot, but my secondary spot. And as soon as I walked in there, I killed a great buck. Like a couple minutes on stand. And it was just one of those things where like, I was ready to go. And my wife was like, you just ride this out. And like, that doesn't happen very often. Like, that's a nice thing to have happen,
The thing that you have to realize is when you're there. You're already, you know what I mean? You're already here. And if you pull the plug early, and again, I am guilty of pulling the plug early. If you pull the plug early, then it's over. Like, in sales, I say all the time, like, okay, well, if I never ask the person, I've already determined that the answer is no. So I have to at least have them give me the no or the maybe or whatever, right? So I could totally transition that into a different conversation. But, like, that's the thing. You're already there. And I can think back to so many hunts, especially when we used to hunt Colorado a lot, where we bailed out a little bit early because we were afraid that the spot that we were getting into the elk, that we were going to kill an elk, and then, we were going to have to pack it out, and it was going to take us over our time limit. And, I used to hunt with these two guys there at the same time. And, I think back and, again, I was self-employed at that time, and they both worked for other people. And I look back at it and I'm like, man, from my perspective, we just had to ask for permission to come back a half a day later or a day later from work. I don't know that it would have been that big of a deal. I know like these days, my one buddy, his schedule is like really regimented with his employer, but it's just one of those things. Like I find myself just getting up against the end of things. And there are times where I'll say to myself, like, eke this out until the very last second, because it can happen at the very last second. I mean, there's so many instances where that has happened. And then there's plenty of more that it didn't happen, but you don't know unless you stick it out. And that's, again, personally one of those things that I'm working on. But at the same time, as I've sort of aged, my IDGAF factor has gone up quite a bit. So, if a hunt doesn't come together, there's less ego that's bruised, when something happens. The only one that still really hurts is, when you've waited to draw an elk tag or a mule deer tag or antelope tag for a long time, and then it doesn't come together. Like those ones sting a bit, but I have to figure out a better process for myself in order to facilitate, being able to stay. And a lot of that for me is just finding connectivity so I can feel level set on making sure that things are okay in my absence. And it's literally one of the things I'm working through because, last few years have just been, there's been so much anguish for me with regard to that. So, I'll get there eventually. It's a matter of everything else in my life. I need to create a process for it.
Yeah. Well, you bring up those, when you pull a really, really good tag for something, and that's a weird experience, in the whitetail world. I'm sure probably the easiest to understand is that Iowa tag, right? Anybody who's ever played the points game and given Iowa all your money for years and years and years and finally got that tag, there's a weird feeling with it. Like it immediately, it has the immediate possibility of putting you right in a trophy hunter mindset where that's what matters the most. And it's not like, I really had this driven home to me last year when I drew my Iowa tag and I hunted down there on that public land, because it was so fun. It wasn't, I mean, it was, I had the goal of killing a good one, but I just knew from scouting and stuff that I was going to see tons of deer and probably beyond lots of them. And it was just so fun. And it made me realize, like, man, when you draw that Iowa tag or you draw that, a good elk tag out west, it's so easy to just be like, I got to kill a 330 plus bull, or I got to kill a 150 inch plus whitetail because I have this tag and I got X amount invested in it. And you're supposed to kill big animals when you get those tags. But really, a lot of what that premium price is and that luck built into drawing it is tied to a quality experience. Like if you go on an elk hunt and you go to Colorado and you're on an over-the-counter unit and it's 8 days of bumping into other hunters and you only hear one real bull bugle and you only see 3 cows, that's a tough deal. That's a low quality experience out there generally in a lot of ways. And then that other tag in the unit where they're only giving out X amount of tags and it's, it takes you 8 years to draw it. What you're getting there, you have a better chance of killing one, but you have a way better chance of just having that immersive elk experience that everybody wants. And it's the same thing in the whitetail world. If you get one of those tags, that Iowa tag, it's still not a guarantee you're going to, you're going to have a taxidermy bill at the end of it, but you have a hell of a lot better chance of going and seeing really cool buck activity and always feeling like you're in the game and just having a super fun hunt.
That's what keeps you, I think for me, that's what keeps me motivated more through the end when you're continuing to have, it's always easier when you're not struggling, right? If you're going out and you're getting into a lot of deer every day and you're having sightings of good deer in an Iowa or an Illinois or even at home or whatever, it makes it so the process is that much easier. If you feel like you're getting beat up every day and you're grinding and whatever else, it's hard to keep your head in the game. I mean, it's really, really difficult. And, last year I drew an Iowa tag too, and I got there just in time for the heat wave. And, I think I did 8 or 9 all day sits, in 70 to 80 degree temperatures, just not conventional weather for that time of year, for second week in November or whatever it was. It is what it is, but, I was fortunate. I ended up shooting a buck on like the last afternoon. I had the next morning to hunt, and then I just had to get home because I had stuff going on with my kids and I was out of time. And it ultimately wasn't the deer that I really went to Iowa for. You know what I mean? It was just like you said, I went there to shoot 150 inch deer or greater. And this deer didn't measure up to that, and I didn't shoot it because it was the last minute. I just kind of had some ground shrinkage, but, I still had a good experience. I still had fun because like you said, I was just seeing tons of deer every day. I mean, there was not a single sit where I didn't get into the stand and wait. Man, I bet you 30, 45 minutes. And then, at that time of year, there were times where it was just a constant flow of deer. That may not have been the bucks that I wanted to shoot or whatever, but at least keeps you entertained and engaged. I would have stayed longer because, literally 2 days, no, right before I left, the day that I actually shot that buck, we had a good weather shift, but I was out of time. But I was engaged and I was still excited and whatever else, and that's a very coveted tag. So you're spot on with that experience thing, and I think that's what's worthwhile for waiting for tags like that, or paying the expense to go to, an out-of-state place for whatever species it is, even turkeys, because you can just have a better experience than potentially you can, in other places. We have fantastic hunting where I am in New York. It's very, very good, but I can unequivocally tell you it pales in comparison to a few other places that I've hunted. And I have a blast here. I mean, just an absolute blast. But and plus it's cool to just go and adventure. I mean, there's so much of this country to see, and using the vehicle of hunting to do it, I think is really kind of a blessing. And I'm glad that I've been able to do that. I mean, through the things that I've done in my career, I mean, I've been all over the world because of this stuff. And, if I were, I don't know, just doing whatever, I don't know that I would have been afforded those opportunities or been as enthusiastic about how they came together and whatever else. And I've also had to do some trips where I was like, oh gosh, got to do that again, but it's, I don't know.
I think we've been on a few of those together. I mean, it happens, but yeah. And it is, again, this is kind of like, just find your own way type of stuff, right? Like some people don't really like to travel to hunt. They want to stay and hunt their farm at home. I've got a buddy like that he'll hunt the same redneck blind over the same food plot every single year till he's dead and be super happy. And it's like, okay, that's your thing. But when you go out and do a little of this travel, like you don't have to play the points game in Iowa. But if you love hunting, one of the coolest things you can do is just go hunt somewhere else. Go have that new experience somewhere else. And sometimes it's not about that quality, the Iowa quality hunt. Sometimes it's just about different. And different can be pretty fun. Like you kind of realize how you default to easy stuff when especially if you've got like a private place set up. It's so easy to go sit the same stands you've always sat and kind of go sit, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's cool when if you kind of slid into that routine to go somewhere where you don't have the option. Then you realize, man, I got to start looking for sign. I got to go mobile, and I gotta be watching more, and it just changes the hunt for you. And some people don't like it, but a lot of people do that, and they go, oh, I needed this. This is really cool.
Well, and you're figuring out something different, right? And that's what the element that of attraction is, right? It's just, I don't know. I personally, I like walking onto a new piece of ground and going, ooh, I don't have any experience with any place that I've ever sat here or any place that I've ever walked here. Like this is virgin, and it's the first time I'm ever garnering any experiences. I mean, I remember, it feels like all my memories that are like the strongest and the most positive are the first time that I hunted a species, or the first time I hunted a species in a certain place or with a certain outfitter. I mean, I don't do a ton of outfitted hunts, but like all of those that are the most standout in my memory are, again, those first timers. I mean, I used to hunt with this one hog outfitter, and I remember my first experience there was like, whoa, you know what I mean? Just blew my mind. So awesome. And then I went back the second time. It was still really good. Every time I've been there, it was really good. But it was a different experience each time. And, I use that economics term, those degrees of satisfaction. My degrees of satisfaction just diminished a little bit. And I went from feeling like, wow, I got to try and figure out a way to do this every year to, wow, I'll come back to so-and-so's place whenever I get the chance. And, and that I was talking to my dad actually about that one place the other day, and he's like, hey, would you go back there? I'm like, I'd like to try somewhere else. And that happens for most people. I mean, if you talk to most outfitters, their repeat customers, the vast majority of them are 3 times. They'll get them 3 times and then they're moving on to someone else. And I think that's just the kind of the Ponce de Leon in us, right? The explorer is falling out, and we want to go and check out new stuff and look for something that gets us more fulfilled.
Yeah. Well, I think when you bring that topic up, you're kind of touching on we love the novelty and the idea of some stuff, but we also love the process of hunting. And like hogs are a big one, right? So many people want to go, I want to go on a hog hunt. I want to go shoot hogs. And you go do it, and it's freaking fun. Like it's sit on that feeder and they start coming in, and then you're like, oh, I kind of want to spot and stalk hogs. Like I know what it's like to shoot them when they're, vacuuming up corn underneath a feeder. And then it just kind of changes. You're like, okay, I know what this is, and it's still a blast, but if you go on a couple of those hunts that are outfitted, you're like, okay, I don't really own that process. I show up and and I think we're drawn to that part of it a lot more than we think sometimes. And that's why whitetail hunting, I really think, is so, there's just magnetism to it that we can't really explain very well, but there is such a year-round process to it. Even if you don't do anything for the next 3 weeks, you're thinking about it, or you might have e-scouted, not really paid attention. There's something always to be done and something always to learn, and you can make it into, you can find something to do every week or every month that just kind of brings you a little bit closer to what you think is going to be success. But it's kind of like, I kind of look at it like training a bird dog, right? People will always say, well, I want that finished bird dog. I'm like, there's no such thing. I work with the best trainers in the world. There's no such thing as a finished bird dog. There's badass dogs that are really good. They're not 100% compliant. They're not, it's not like anybody who tells you, that my dog's never lost a bird, or, every duck we've ever shot that sailed off into the distance and hit the water has come back in my dog's mouth. That's bullshit. Like there's not perfection out there, but you can keep working toward it. Just like in the whitetail world. Hey,
if you find that that trainer that makes 100% finished bird dogs, let me know, because I have one that could use that.
Well, let me tell you, if you find a trainer that tells you they can do that, then run away.
Gosh, yeah.
Because they're not going to get you there. Tim, so much fun as always, buddy. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your stories and your wisdom. You're out there selling some land. You're doing a little bit of writing. Where can people find you out there?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook and Instagram. So I have, you can find me on either one of those, just on my kind of personal stuff, which is just Timothy G. Kent. There might be some underscores or dots in there, but I'm sure if you find me, just look for the funny guy who's with a kid or a wife, and that's me. Big smile. And then I work for Whitetail Properties Real Estate. I'm a land specialist, and my Whitetail Properties handle is just Tim Kent WP, and that's again on Instagram and Facebook. And and then I do some writing for Bowhunter magazine and a few other places. So you can check out some stories there too.
Awesome, thanks, buddy.
Yeah, man, thanks.
That's it for this week on Wired to Hunt. I have been your guest host, Tony Peterson, and I cannot thank you enough for listening. Please check in every single week. We're going to have more good whitetail hunting information coming your way on this podcast, on my Wired to Hunt Foundations podcast, at our Wired to Hunt website that is full of videos and articles on whitetail hunting. We've got a ton of new YouTube stuff coming out. If you look anywhere in the Wired to Hunt world, you're going to find some really good whitetail hunting content. So please check that out. As always, again, thank you so much for listening.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.